What's up, guys? Welcome to the beginner guide video on APIs. At the end of this video, you'll understand what an API is, how to use it, some real world examples, and really why use it, right? That's a lot of the big question. And so this is a super beginner friendly guide, really high level. This is going to be for those people who haven't really understood it before, your no code, low code people, the founders, and anyone who's really looking to leverage the tools we have available to ourselves in today's society to make your life easier and to probably grow your business quicker. And so by the end of this video, you'll understand completely what an API is, which is an application programming interface. You'll understand how they work, how to use them, and, of course, why to use them. I think I already said that, but nonetheless, doubling down. And so API Complete Beginner Guide. Some examples of real-world APIs are going to be things like Stripe, Google Maps, and ChatGPT, right? Stripe uses it for payments, Google Maps uses it for locations, OpenAI uses it for AI responses, and weather, which I didn't include here, uses it for forecasts to get those real-time interactions between different softwares across the board. Essentially, when one thing does something somewhere else, it automatically goes through a set of processes that send it another place from there. And so it goes like this: client, who's ever making the request or asking for information. Then it goes to the API. API then goes to the server then goes back to the API, and it goes back to the client from there. So it's a whole round trip interface. And to give you a better example of an API, let's think about a restaurant analogy. And I know I misspelled restaurant, ignore it. So when you're hungry and you go to a restaurant and you want to get some food, what do? You, the customer, you first have to ask the waiter for food, right? Because you can't just go to the kitchen. You can't just look at the menu. You actually have to ask the waiter. And so essentially the flow is you, the customer, needs to get the food from the kitchen, but you need to look at the menu first, but you need to order from the waiter before that. And so the waiter in this round trip example is going to be the person that's going to be delivering you all of the stuff from the kitchen and is going to be taking your request from the menu, which essentially this is the API call. The kitchen is the server, and the waiter is the actual API, and you are the person making the request. I don't know how good of an example that is, but I hope it makes sense, guys. Essentially, round trip execution, you have to talk to someone to get the data you want that's somewhere else. That's all it is, because you can't go to the kitchen yourself. So you have to talk to someone, which is the API in this example, to ask them for your food from the kitchen. And the API documentation, which essentially is just the menu of options from the kitchen. So, and I'll give you a quick example of some API documentations as well. Apollo API documentation. Let's go there. This is one that I use a lot. You guys should be familiar with it if you watch my videos, but these are all the different API endpoints, which I'll get over the terminology a little bit later. But you go here and you can see a whole different menu of a bunch of options we have for utilizing Apollo's API, for getting information from this company, Apollo, from their database. So before I get ahead of myself, why API? Why API is because, well, one, it's secure. You get a lot of security when you're using the API. You don't have to give direct access to the database. They don't have to give you direct access to the database. It's a whole nother level of consistency because you can define the parameters of your API typically in a lot more detail than you can with just a general search from a UI interface, right? In like a website or something. And then scalability. You can actually build these APIs into different workflows, into different parts of your business. And so instead of having to do all this manual work, the API does that. My God. That's so strange. I never get things stuck in my throat, but I just had like a weird cough thing. Anyways, scalability, right? That's going to be workflows. That's going to be business integrations. That's going to be putting this API somewhere in your business so that you don't have to manually go somewhere. It just happens automatically when something gets an execution. And now what's some API terminology? So API terminology, we have endpoint, right? So that's the URL you talk to. We have request, what you ask for. We have response, what you get back. HTTP method, what action you want. JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. That's the structured data format and API key. This is your access pass. And you need all of these things together to make one single API call more often than not. There are different cases where you might not need all of this or you might need more, but more often than not, this is all you need. And so some different methods of using an HTTP request for HTTP APIs, and I'll get into what an HTTP request is. It's basically just a specific way to request information from the server when there's not a native integration for whatever program or service you're using. Because most of the time there's not. So we just have to basically build that integration ourselves. So on screen, you're going to get something that's either get, which is give me some data, post, which is create something. And oftentimes it's when it's creating something, it's saying, hey, I'm creating this request to get this data for you to send me back, right? If we go back up here, if we remember client API server, API client, right? So you might be making a post, you're asking for it to create something, but you might be creating a request for some information, a query for some information for it to return to you. So it's not necessarily just actually creating something, although it could be. Put dash patch, update something, delete, remove something, right? Pretty simple. And then the types of APIs, quick overview, REST. So the RESTful API is going to be the most common across the board. It's basically the only one you'll use outside of webhooks, which do have use cases as well. But more often than not, you're probably going to be using APIs opposed to webhooks, but webhooks do have their space. And GraphQL, you'll pretty much never use. But the RESTful and the webhook are going to be super important. Webhooks are typically quicker, and RESTful APIs are typically uh, more customizable. GraphQL, I don't really ever use it. Who knows with that one? Common beginner mistakes. So if you're just starting this, you might forget using your authentication, right? You're always going to need authentication, whether it's an OAuth 2, whether it's a service account, whether it's an API key, which that's the number one thing. That is the number one you will use. You need some sort of authentication. And then you might be using the wrong HTTP method, right? You might be using get instead of post. You might be using post instead of patch as put. You might be using patch as put instead of delete. And then not reading API docs, right? These things are huge, guys. And also, AI these days is pretty decent at reading the API docs and giving you the information you need. So leverage the API docs, leverage, AI, and then hard coding API keys. Well, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it can cause some problems because sometimes API keys are flexible, but most of the time you actually probably won't have too much of a problem with hard coding API keys, but it's something to be aware of. Okay, now I'm going to show you a quick little tutorial of how to actually utilize an HTTP request. So you go HTTP here, and then let's go post. Well, we actually don't need to do any of that yet. I'm just going to show you in Apollo, for instance. So I'll show you kind of what's going on here. In the API documentation, you're going to have a couple things. One, the API endpoint, right? That's the URL we use to actually target what we want. So we put that there. In this case, let's say people search. And then you have your person titles, right? Things like that. You can add it. You can add it. You can add this one, which I already did apparently. You can add this. And when you add those items, most API documentations are in a format like this, where you'll then have something called a CURL. So most people call it a curl request. You can actually copy that, and then you can just input the curl here, guys. And then boom, 90% of the hard work is done. Now you can see here that it's in the query parameters. A lot of this will also actually work in the body parameters, and you can either have it using the fields or using the JSON, which I actually recommend, but you just have to remember to wrap everything in the squiggly brackets, and you basically need to make quotes around every request. So when you are making that, let's say person titles, you can see here that's person titles and there's an array. And so how you would do it in JSON is you go person titles, right? And then you go like this, and then there's going to be an array. And then in the array, it would be something like item 1. And if you're mapping things, you want to go fixed expression. Oh, geez, it got rid of it. That's so annoying when I went. Don't know why. But anyways, That's basically proper formatting. I actually added one too many brackets because I'm so used to typing the mapping. But guys, there's only one set of squiggly brackets on the outside. It's not two. I apologize for that. And then every item you add after that, you also want to add a comma. So commas are very important. And here's the thing. For the JSON for this, don't get overwhelmed by it because it seems technical, but realistically, you can ask your old friend ChatGPT for the JSON parameters more often than not. So let's say, make me JSON for an Apollo API request where I'm requesting CEOs from the people search. And let's see what we got. And you'll see that it's going to think for a second. Got you here, clean JSON, blah, 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 people search. And here you go. So let's read this page, person titles. I'm familiar with this one already, so I can tell you that this is right. Yeah, this looks sort by field. I don't know about that one. I've never seen that one before. I don't know that's in here. Sort. Yeah, I don't know if that one's in there. Sometimes it messes up. You have to cross-reference with the API documents. So everything else here is good to go, and you can actually just take this and you can just copy it directly into here. And I like going expression, but nonetheless, it's all good either way. And that's what your API request JSON is going to look like. And so just leverage the AI there, guys. That's what I did at the beginning. And since we have it in the body, we can actually get rid of that. And this is all good to go, except for one thing, which would be my API key. And so you see, normally it's right there. There we go. When did they add auth access tokens? That's new. But anyways, you can go here with your X API key, and you would actually just type it in here, and you go X-API-key, and then you type in your API key here, which the API keys can almost always be found in the settings tab. So just to go back here, where do I find API keys? I'll just type this in, find API keys, and generate them in the settings tab. So more often than not, that's where you're going to be able to find the API keys. You generate them, and then you just flip them into here for whatever service you're using. And now they're all going to be a little bit different. Now that's just how this one for Apollo works. However, some of them are going to be a little bit more complex. Some of them are going to need more. Some of them are going to need less. Things are going to be located in different areas. That's when you leverage your old friend ChatGPT, or you use the API documentations to read about how to integrate this stuff. Both are great resources. Oftentimes you need to use both at the same time to cross-reference to make sure ChatGPT is not messing up. And when you don't understand something on the API guide here, you just ask ChatGPT to clarify and you just give it some context. But nonetheless, that's really it when it comes to APIs, guys. They're pretty simple stuff. They can be a bit intimidating at first, but hey, if you found this video helpful, if you enjoyed the watch, if you got any information out of this, please give me a like and subscribe. I'm going to come out with more educational content, more content that hopefully can help you guys and is hopefully helping somewhere out there. Nonetheless, again, I'm Jake. Thanks for the time. Catch you in the next one, guys. Cheers.